luxury is becoming less popular. There's less people, I think, looking for luxury videos, and it's a kind of category that is just not realistic in this certain time in history, I think, as well. I think a lot of people in Australia are also struggling with the cost of living. All sorts of things are contributing to luxury being less desirable, and so those kind of brands that are like not as popular simply cannot survive. Like, they're losing a lot of money by having a store in Australia. Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I'm Jess. So what I've noticed is over the last few years or so, these major luxury brands have come to Australia and then after a few years have left. And I wanted to talk about those brands today and why they're not being successful in Australia. I'm thinking it's because there's less people in Australia who are into luxury. Don't get me wrong, a lot of people in Australia do buy luxury, but it is a much smaller market. And when things go down, when sales are not really going that well in Australia, well, it just so happens that a lot of these brands decided to exit. And a lot of designer brands actually came to Australia during like 2016, 2017, when there started to become a luxury boom. We saw it a lot on social media, the rise of influencers, and it became more fashionable locally in Australia to wear designer clothes. Whereas maybe before it was a little bit more reserved for truly wealthy people, it became a lot more mainstream. And I think we saw that with like, especially like Louis Vuitton and their Supreme collection, with the sneakerhead kind of community. And then there's also, you know, girls who loved YSL and Gucci. There was just more of this kind of like buzz around luxury during that period. And during that period, actually, and up until like lockdown, COVID and all that, there was a huge growth in luxury, and particularly in Australia. There's certain brands though that have now departed from Australia since luxury is kind of dying a little bit. And I wanted to talk about those brands today that basically are going down. So I'm not sure if these brands are suffering in other countries, but really they really were doing badly in Australia and they had to leave. So these stores no longer exist in Australia. First brand, which actually only came to Australia a few years ago, is Furla. This is, I believe, French. And they specialize in coated canvas kind of like tote bags, and they're kind of a similar vibe to like Louis Vuitton or Goyard, but they're a little bit more under the radar, lesser known. And they opened stores in a store in Melbourne and Sydney. And when they first opened, I do think that they were doing okay, but I always noticed that their stores were quite quiet. When I went to Sydney about a year ago, I passed the Furla store and it said that it's actually closed. And I'm like, oh, okay, they're shut down already. And now it just so happens that they've also shut down in Melbourne. So I think that was a brand that for some reason it didn't take off in Australia. I think it could be to do with the marketing. Maybe they just didn't have a bag that went viral enough, or like they didn't have enough buzz around the brand that made it hyped, so it just didn't work out in Australia. Obviously it is a very famous brand, it's an old brand, but it's one of those brands that couldn't survive in the Australian market. And I think in the Australian market we're very much influenced by what local celebrities wear. And I don't really follow like TikTok and that sort of thing, but I know if like certain like footballers' wives or like local Australian celebrities wear designer brands, like things go viral. So that is why, like, you know, like the Loewe bags have gone really crazy, things like Zimmerman, because yeah. But whereas Furla, maybe they weren't like gifting their bags to the right influencers. I'm not too sure. I'm just trying to work out why they weren't successful in Australia and why they just had such a short stint as well, because it costs a lot to open up a store and to establish yourself in a market, to hire staff, and for it to kind of like fail so fast, it's yeah, it's a bit weird. So yeah, that was a brand that really didn't do well in Australia. Next is Givenchy. Now, Givenchy is one of those brands that I think had a real peak in the 2010s with bags like the Givenchy Antigona. Since then, you know, I think that a lot of people were buying their ready-to-wear, like their slides a few years ago, and t-shirts that said Givenchy. Kind of when the Logomania and stuff was really big in 2018, 2017. Givenchy was having a real moment, but since then I don't think they've had anything that's come out that has really captured the mainstream market. And because of that, they've actually left Australia now. So that's quite significant because I always thought Givenchy was one of those like main designer brands, and for it to not be in Australia anymore is quite a statement. Now you can still buy Givenchy through other stores in Australia like Morai, and I think there's like Harrods or something in Australia, and perhaps David Jones, I can't remember. So you can still buy it through other like department stores, but and of course we can still buy Givenchy online, but there's no actual Givenchy store in Australia anymore. And it's one of those brands that I think it's kind of lost its direction. I don't hear many people talking about it as much, and I think it's kind of like not as hyped anymore, is it? So yeah, I don't know whether Givenchy need to introduce like a new it bag or whether they just need a refresh, but it's something that couldn't last in Australia either. Next, another brand that has left Australia that at one point was very popular, and I remember there used to be lines outside the store, is Off-White. Off-White, obviously Virgil Abloh was the creative director, and I would assume because he's now passed away, maybe the brand is not as popular anymore. All I know is that they've left us the Australian market, and perhaps the designs are a little bit repetitive as well. All I know about Off-White is that they do have some bags that kind of took off, like that little clip one. I remember that was quite popular. And their sneakers, and I know that they collaborate with like Nike and all that. So it's also part of that kind of like sneakerhead community. So I assume in that niche it's popular, but still, I guess that trend as well to be in a sneakerhead kind of aesthetic, maybe that is not as popular as it used to be as well. So in turn, that's why they couldn't last in Australia. They had to leave. Now Off-White, it's another one of those brands that maybe it's just like not as popular anymore, and it's also a fairly young brand. So I don't know whether we're going to see Off-White have a lot of longevity unless they release something that really takes off in the mainstream social media again. Next is Furla. So Furla is an Italian brand, and actually I remember it was in Australia for a long time. They even had outlets, and Furla is a brand that I personally really like. I do have a few bags from Furla, including some Hello Kitty collection ones, and I often loved going to Furla outlet because they had so many good deals there. And it's surprising because I've seen like a bit of a rise in this sector in Australia of like contemporary brands, particularly with the rise of Coach, but Furla was always quite dead, and their Metropolis bag was probably one of their most viral designs. And anytime they did like a special collaboration, I think that was quite popular as well. But aside from that, they didn't really have anything in recent years that really took off. And because of that, they couldn't last in Australia, even though their price point is much more accessible than brands like Givenchy and Faure Lepage and all that. So yeah, they did exit Australia as well, which was to my surprise because I thought that kind of bracket was doing well, but it's just the designs were not captivating people, and maybe their presence on social media was not good enough. Unlike brands like Coach, which is really infiltrating my Instagram and even on YouTube. There's so many YouTubers talking about Coach bags as opposed to, brands like Furla. Next is Bally. That is another brand that has left Australia. They're also, I believe, quite an old brand, and they make beautiful quality leather goods. I remember a few years ago, a pair of Bally shoes went really viral. It was like these like loafer style shoes that at the time, this is when the Princetown loafers were also really cool from Gucci. They did have a few viral designs, but in recent years, like the last 2 years, I don't think they've had anything. And in terms of their handbags, I do occasionally hear people talk about Bally handbags, like for example, Lady Vintage Bags. She collects vintage Bally bags. Shout out to her, I'll link her below. But in terms of the newer designs, I don't really hear many people talking about Bally, and that does show that that does affect their sales, because it just comes down to like, capturing a market, capturing a group of people to come to your store. And if you don't have that kind of like market who collects handbags or is really into fashion, it's going to be hard to make sales. Sure, they'll have like long-term clients, but they come and go as well. So yeah, they really need to have something that sets them apart. And I don't think they had something that really was distinct enough for people to go there. Although I've heard that Bally quality is amazing and the price point is pretty good for what you get. for some reason they also couldn't survive in Australia, and who knows how they're gonna, I don't know what their sales are like internationally. Perhaps they do better in European countries, but in Australia it was a no-go. Next is Tod's. This is another brand that has now left Australia. Tod's I always thought was a brand that people go to for reliable, comfortable, kind of stylish loafers and shoes. But for some reason they couldn't last in Australia. I do feel like they did have a lot of like popular shoe designs. And I thought there was a certain market, maybe like an older market, that would go for Tod's. But in terms of capturing a younger market, I don't think they did very well there. And that's where I think the money is at, because yeah, if you capture a younger market, older people will still shop there and younger people will aspire to shop there and save their money to buy things from there. Because a lot of young people are blowing their money on luxury, and a lot of young people who can't even afford luxury buy it. But it does contribute a lot to these designer brand sales. And a brand like Tod's, I don't know if it appeals to a younger customer, and that I think was their shortfall and why they probably weren't successful in Australia. In terms of their handbags, I actually went to Tod's like last year, and I actually thought that their bags were really nice. The quality felt amazing too, and the price point was much better than brands like Chanel and Gucci and all that. So I thought they were actually quite underrated, maybe a hidden gem in Australia, but they didn't last. So yeah, it's kind of a shame, but yeah, I wonder if Tod's is doing well internationally as well, or whether the Australian market just didn't like them. Yeah, these brands did exit Australia. Does that surprise you guys? And my prediction for brands that are probably next in exiting Australia, because luxury is becoming less popular. It's definitely, I've seen it. I mean, even in my own stats on my YouTube channel, it could be that my videos are more boring. Maybe people don't like me as much, but I don't know. I also think that the trend towards talking about luxury is not as big as it was a few years ago. And the growth in my channel, I'm really trying to get to 20,000 subscribers, but it's taken me a really long time to get there because there's less people, I think, looking for luxury videos. And it's a kind of category that is just not realistic in this certain time in history, I think, as well. I think a lot of people in Australia are also struggling with the cost of living. Buying a house in Australia is also very expensive. All sorts of things are contributing to luxury being less desirable. And so those kind of brands that are like not as popular simply cannot survive. Like, they're losing a lot of money by having a store in Australia. And I think it's brands like Alexander McQueen, even Versace and Kate Spade that I think are next in probably leaving Australia. The brands that, like, in Melbourne especially, they don't do very well. And although I think they're major designer brands and they have a lot of iconic pieces, and in fashion history they're very significant, it all comes down to money and sales. So if they don't have a viral product, they don't have anything that is really selling out, it's hard for them to stay afloat. Even brands like Burberry are really struggling in Australia at the moment, whereas many years ago they were much more popular. It could also be due to the price points. The prices of luxury have gone up so much since 2018, so that is definitely affecting people's mindset towards luxury as well. But anyways, guys, thanks for watching my video today. Sorry, I'm a bit snuffly. I'm not feeling the best today, but thanks for bearing with me anyway. And I hope you enjoyed my video. Let me know your thoughts on this as well, and I'll talk to you on my next one. Bye!